Scott, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and let our listeners know what we're talking about today.
I'm Scott Newman. I am a previous retail pharmacy owner, and I'm also currently the president of Pharmacists United for Truth and Transparency. And I think that we plan on talking a little bit about PUTT today.
Now that you're no longer a pharmacy owner, we've got to lay down some ground rules for our conversation. And if we start getting into the weeds, you can't just say, well, Mike, that sucks to be you.
There's a strong urge, a very strong urge, but I think I can manage.
I know that when you're in the pharmacy as an owner still, you might think this fight's going to be alive forever in me because I know what these pharmacy owners had gone through and are going through, and I'm going to keep powering on. Was that your thought? And has that been true?
I'm still pissed. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I'm angry. And I don't know when that might resolve. It could be like Batman and Bruce Wayne. I could literally just take this for the rest of my livelihood as a revenge. Who knows?
It seems like your stress would be a little bit less, which would maybe take some of that off. But do you see that continuing to be less, or do you think it might even get worse because you have more time to get pissed?
You know, I've always been a reader. So one of the things that helps me to communicate, especially in this role, is I read anything I can get my hands on that I come across to you know, about the industry and such. And all I've done since I've stopped, you know, running a pharmacy is I've found more resources to read. So I haven't really delved back into social media as much as I had been prior, just as things change and you know, the ebbs and flows start to even out of what my new normal is, but I'm still reading a lot. And so I think that I have a healthy acknowledgement of what I still find just or unjust. And this is still a very unjust type situation.
We all know that when we're talking to somebody and supposed to be listening, whatever the subject is, you start thinking about, well, how's that affecting me now? You know, so you hear their story, you acknowledge it. One of my friends calls me the world's best active non-listener, something like that.
I get it. Hey, with the ADHD that I have, like people are actually pretty amazed. Like they swear, or at least when they first get to know me, that I don't listen, like I'm not paying attention. But truthfully, that's kind of how I do pay attention. I distract myself doing something else while I'm listening, and they bring it up all the time. Scott's really listening, even though he doesn't look like he is.
I'm the opposite though, because I've had years, you know, of practice of, and I'm not proud. Well, I guess I'm proud if I'm going to be first in something. Well, that's something to be first in, but
just own it.
I should own it. But yeah, for years, you know, customers come in and they tell you stuff and your mind is somewhere else and you have to pretend like you're listening. And unfortunately, I do that for my family too. So I'm the most active non-listener. But here's what I'm getting at. When you're doing that, when you're listening to people and you have your own story going on, you're getting into what they're doing, but you're also thinking, well, how does that compare to me and so on? But I can see maybe not having that now. As you start reading more, you can get pretty deep into people's problems and their emotions if you don't have your own emotion furnace in your own pharmacy just firing up all the time.
I jokingly say that I make it about me, but truthfully, no one in their right mind would do what they have done the last 9 years in both these roles if it was just about me. But yeah. I've always tried to make myself available to others based on my experiences and what I've witnessed in my pharmacy. So my big fear is actually not being the guy that comes to the table with the new example or the new, you know, issue that I would have found as, you know, a pharmacy owner. I don't want to fall out of like, so if I start falling out of touch from things, then that's a whole different thing for me. I think that there's that possibility because now I'm not, you know, living the moment And a lot of our ideas and experiences and things that we've come across come from our board members because, most of us are pharmacy owners, and not being one anymore, I'm afraid that maybe I won't contribute to that conversation as effectively.
Yeah, I guess because we're all kind of in the same boat, as someone tells a story, because we're all getting screwed equally.
Mm-hmm.
As someone tells a story, you can say, yeah, I get that. Here's my side of it. And I'm fully agreeing with you guys because we all have this same story going on. It's not like you were bringing a story like, the sub shop down the street closed. And so my big issue is,
lunch
or whatever. You're all bringing the same story. So, yeah, you're not able to bring that example, perhaps.
Or to say, hey, wait a second, is that happening to me too? Let me go check.
Yeah.
So I'll be missing out on that a little bit.
That's got to feel good, though, sometimes.
It's actually, thinking about it, actually, I've had to run those reports, or I've had to call the PSAO, or, to verify or to double check or run, phantom claims on things we're trying to verify cost and pricing on. And it's trying to fit that into an already too busy day is a real pain in the butt sometimes.
When would you ever think that you weren't bringing enough to the organization anymore based on something that happened because of your sale?
I don't really know that I know the answer to that. I mean, I lived, for the most part, pretty vicariously through other owners. I imagine that'll still happen. It depends on to what degree the industry changes going forward. Because obviously things change, and that's okay. It's just that I will now no longer change with it.
When you guys talk, your board, how many on the board?
I think we have 9 right now.
All right. So when you guys talk, is it ever your job or someone's job to say, all right, guys, let's rein it in. Enough bitching. Let's go.
Yeah, that's Monique's job. Being the only one who didn't have any sweat equity mostly in the game, we can get rather negative, and there's always that fear that that's just your culture of the board, but it's a hard thing to gauge when you're constantly being crapped on, and rightfully so. We vent. It's either that or drink more, and we don't want to do that. But yeah, Monique wants to try to keep some things positive and try to keep things, because, in leadership, that's what you do. You try to maintain the positivity, but I think that you have to have a healthy dose of reality with that. And so we balance each other out well.
And I'm not talking so much on long term, but even like a meeting, like when you guys are all on video or something like that, do the meetings, the board meetings, let's say,
yeah,
are they focused enough for you?
Oh, no, they're very focused. Yeah, they're very focused. We like to joke and say that we do the best Robert's rules of etiquette that we know how to. We have minutes and we have an agenda, and Monique and I discuss that usually the day before we have our board meeting. We can add or change things. We do save the last maybe 15 minutes just for board members to bring anything that they want to talk about to everybody's attention. And those discussions are usually based off of somebody's, schedule coming up with a legislator, or somebody's experience with, getting, excessive fees taken out at the point of sale, or, it's usually something new, new business from a board member's perspective.
When you've got, let's say, 9 people spending an hour or two on the computer, that's like half of a work week. You've got like 20 work hours there. And so you're all bringing your gripes and complaints. That's what gets you onto the board. But she then is able to focus that 20 hours and say, let's go.
Formally, we have a board meeting once a month, but informally, we have phone calls or Zoom meetings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. Tuesdays is usually reserved for me and Monique and maybe my vice president Dawn, or Deb Kevaney out of Minnesota. She's more active in the the workings of the organization. So, three or four of us are on a Tuesday call that discusses Monique's schedule for the week and anything that we need to talk about that we're planning or dealing with. It's mostly business discussions. The Friday call is open for any of our board members if they want to join or if they have time or if they're not swamped. And the Friday call is kind of a non-guided conversation that may recap things that we've already texted each other about, or we usually take a few minutes and complain. Sometimes
Sure.
It's half of the conversation, but Fridays are for complaining. Yeah. And once we get that off our chest, we can have a good weekend. But there does have, in such a frustrating and obviously our listeners and yourself know this better than anything. When you get kicked in the nuts every single day, there's not a whole lot of good things to talk about sometimes that make the pain go away.
Yeah.
So, I have found self-deprecating humor to be a very therapeutic thing for me.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times I will just drag myself around, and I try to be careful about it because I know it bothers Monique, but for a good amount of time there's really no outlet for the frustrations except for amongst people who know what you're dealing with. So That's where you unload it.
I'm in the middle of reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a psychiatrist in Auschwitz, and that's one of the things he's saying in there. It's like, even in the midst of the concentration camp, he said to his buddies there, he said, we got to think about one thing to laugh about every day, or you go crazy. The value of humor, and I'm not putting pharmacists by any means into the category of concentration camps, but the value of humor under stress, especially with comrades, it's like, there's a huge value to that.
Yeah, and sometimes all you have is to make fun of yourselves.
I often have a feeling of embarrassment being a pharmacist, being in this position, especially when I complain about the contracts we've signed. And I know that you and I spoke last time about contracts of adhesion and things like that, but I'm often embarrassed in my mind. If I'm part of it, then I'm part of the problem. And there's a lot of emotions for me that go along to need that humor. There's rage, there's disgust, there's embarrassment, there's sorrow, there's a lot of things. Disbelief.
Like, seriously, how can this be? Like, it's almost to the point where it's so ridiculous that, like, what else can you do but make fun of it?
We're talking about 9 people on this board in this organization that share something in common. What is this board, Scott? Is it made up of pharmacy owners?
Yeah, doers, people who we've made connections with, either within our own membership or different functions, who we recognize as somebody who we would like to have amongst our ranks. Since we don't have a whole lot of paid staff, nor do we have the budget for it, then we want to find people who are doers, people who can handle owning a pharmacy and still work, 20 hours a week at PUTT for free, So it's people who are trying to make things happen and not just, ride the tailcoats of everybody around them.
When you say doer and you say 20 hours, give me an example of that.
Well, a lot of our graphics are rooted in a lot of research and data analysis. Dawn down in Florida has crunched hours upon hours, probably. I mean, I can't even quantify it. It's so many hours crunching data so that we can make a nice graphic out of that data. There's people who have made personal connections with very important people in either the state they're in, legislature-wise. Deb Kevney up in Minnesota, she formed an independent pharmacy association called the Minnesota Indies, or Mindies, and she's got 100 and some odd people organized and together with one mission as independent owners now, and that's within the last 2 years. Dawn facilitated organizing bar in Florida, and at one point they had 100 or so members for that organization. And even though it's not a PUTT organization, we help to market and make connections with lobbyists and such for their mission. And granted, it's not been successful, but it is Florida. But just to organize a group of independent owners like that takes a lot. And these are kind of people that we have on our board.
It's interesting when I'm hearing that, because it reminds me of being on a parochial school board years ago. And I learned the hard way, I guess, that our board was a recommending board. In other words, we would get together for like 3 months in a row, talking about something. And then the leader of the parish would come in and say, no. It's like, what the hell do we do that for? But what I'm hearing your stuff, it sounds to me like there's enough freedom, and maybe it's even encouraged for people not to get like the approval of all the way up through the almighty head of PUTT to be able to do something.
Well, I mean, obviously we're more concerned about facilitating change. I often interviewed my previous bosses without them knowing. And so I would ask them questions like, how come this manager micromanages his people and then you just let your people do their job? And he basically said to me, if I wanted to micromanage people, then I would hire people who needed to be micromanaged. And he said, but that's not what I want. I don't hire people I have to micromanage. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like we don't put people on the board that we have to micromanage. We don't have time for that. We need people who are going to go out and facilitate change, bring the ideas back to us so that we can roll it to other places or share the information if it's successful, if it's not, and we can learn from that too. But, people who, if we do have to delegate some work, or if there's some things that need to get accomplished quickly or even large scale project wise, you can't really hand that off to somebody who is not even a self-motivating person usually. So it's just a good idea to have people who are quote unquote doers, people who are self-motivated and don't require micromanagement, that if you do have a project, it's going to get done because they already take initiative to do things that they need to do.
How do you know that? A lot of boards take warm bodies. How do you know with PUTT? Do you have a flexible board where some years you might have 5 people and some year you might have 15? Or how do you know that you're not getting non-doers on your board, let's say?
Well, you don't. And occasionally you get surprised. But we ask at least a 3-year commitment. That doesn't always work out. If you want to do a 10-year commitment, there's no reason you can't. It's just up to you. We just ask for a minimum of 3-year commitment. But it's a long interview process, and I say that facetiously because it's not really a formal interview. But just like you and I know each other, and every time we interact, we learn a little bit more about each other.
Right.
Same with the people who we eventually nominate or ask to join our board. They're people that we've interacted with or we've worked on something with, and that's a very informal process, but it's probably the best way to interview somebody is to just work and interact with them over the course of time when you have an opening on the board and you offer it to the best candidate based on who you know and worked with.
What is the supply and demand? Do you have enough people that want on and you're denying some, or would your board grow if you found the right people?
Yeah, well, our bylaws are written so I think that we can have up to 11.
Yeah.
We rarely have carried 11. We've gotten close. And that's only because we would rather run with less people waiting for somebody who we know will participate and be engaged than just ask anybody to be there. Because otherwise, you end up carrying other people, and we've got enough to do to not have to do that. So it's one of those scenarios where we can have up to 11. We probably average 9, and it's only a priority to fill those spots when we have a candidate who we want to approach to offer the position to. And not everybody says yes, some people have too much going on, or maybe they don't mind supporting the mission, but they don't want to contribute to the mission from a time standpoint. Maybe they don't get along with some of our other board members. That happens. Obviously, some personalities are stronger than others. So there's different reasons why. But for the most part, I think that, at least I did, I'd hope that the people that we do bring into this particular role feels honored to do it. I know I was. I felt like it was a huge, acknowledgement of my skill set to be invited.
Do you turn people down?
It's not like we announced that we're looking for a board member. It's not something that we really publicize. It's one of those situations where I think that I don't know who would want to do this. Don't get me wrong. I think that you would be honored to. I was honored to be invited, and was excited to do so. But I'm not sure that I would have gone looking for that role.
What hole is PUTT filling that the other, let's say, 3 to 6 national organizations aren't filling, aren't able to fill, don't want to fill, whatever?
So let me just state for the record, or prior to what I'm about to say, we encourage every organization or every person that we engage with, membership-wise or non-membership-wise, to join, their local, state, and national organizations. We're not trying to usurp membership anywhere. In fact, our quote-unquote membership, as Monique likes to call us, are actually donators. We're a donation-driven organization, and we just call them memberships. If you donate to the organization regularly, it does give you a little bit of access to some things that maybe the people who aren't donating don't have. But we always require, I say require, it's highly encouraged that, my board members are members of the large national organizations like NCPA and APHA and such. At this point, I believe that we all are, unless someone has just not told us that they got to that point. I'm very active with VPHA here in Virginia. I've been on the legislative government affairs committee for 6 years now. I believe that's about right. And I've had other roles, here as well. If we're going to work in a state, we want them to be members of this. We'd rather work with the state organization through them, because the resources and their structures already facilitate what we're trying to accomplish as it is.
Sure.
Usually, and some states are better than others with that.
No sense going in out of pride and reinventing the wheel.
No. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to. We don't always agree with some of the direction that the larger organizations go or take. We're a little bit too angry for that. We think that there's a lot to be said about how dirty the PBMs fight and how nice we play as a community, which we don't really too much agree with. We want to be a little bit more aggressive, because I think that's the only way you can fight them. That being said, not everybody agrees with that, but I can tell you that the whole good cop, bad cop thing is a thing for a reason. I wish that we would get utilized for that more often than not, but there's a level of nicety that is maintained that all I can assign to it is the reason why we've been getting our asses kicked for so long. I think that we have an edge to us. We're not really afraid to say the hard things. It doesn't always get received well by our colleagues, but I think that it's effective to the degree with which we're recognizing who we're at war against.
these bigger organizations being the good cops. You've got a mass murderer in the PBMs that have done their crime, and you've got the good cops in the organizations saying, here's how we're going to respond to that. You wish that the good cops would call in the bad cops once in a while and use you actually as a bad cop, because you can say the dirty things and maybe not as politically correct as some of the good cops say it. You wish they would use you more, almost as a warning, like, if you don't listen to us as a good cop, you're going to see a lot more of the bad cop.
Yeah, I see it more as of a release the hounds. You know, when you're not getting what you need out of the process, and you need, membership of an organization like this to flood the social media with, let's just call it what it is, being direct, I guess. It's, we have a tendency in our organization, in our membership. By the way, I do remind the other organizations that my membership is their membership. It just happens to be that this particular sect is a little bit more pissed off and aggressive and willing to make a little bit more noise than the rest of the get along gang. So I tell you, that kind of social media presence that we have allows for us to be very vocal and get a lot of attention. And I hope that it's the right kind. And sometimes I get disagreed with too. I'm sorry, but if you have somebody who is in a position of power that can change or fix our issues, I don't believe that you cut them any slack because of that.
Have there been organizations that have publicly admonished you, saying, you saw what PUTT did, we don't stand with them?
I don't think we've gotten anything like that. Most of our admonishment comes, privately on the back end. We get yelled at by somebody who thinks that we're, causing problems or not cooperating.
They send you a letter or what? If it's not public.
We've received an email or two.
Really?
Directed at leadership, sure. Yeah. Or in a meeting, because we do have meetings with these organizations, and sometimes they don't go so great. I'm more in the role of, I want to work with these organizations. I know they don't necessarily want to work with us.
Yeah.
I'll give it a summation. If there is a general disagreement over the way something should be done or handled, then depending on how strongly they feel about it, will either get ignored or they will say something if they feel like it's egregious enough. But I've also said our piece to them as well, and that isn't always received well. But it's obvious that no one else is saying these things to them who should be.
And you'll let them know, and you think maybe your voice of letting them know might be a little louder than just the average pharmacist in a store saying, I don't agree with that, but you can bring that message?
I think they surround themselves with too many people who just agree and say yes to them and enjoy being part of the club.
Devil's advocate. You don't need PUTT telling them that they should think differently. That should come from the constituents and from the membership and so on. But you think that your voice is maybe a healthy voice of dissent that maybe is a little bit louder than the average member's voice alone?
Well, we've put ourselves in the position of not being ignored easily. When you push your way to the big kids table, It's harder for them to ignore you.
What's a current hole that the major organizations, with all their good values, but maybe some shortcomings, but individuals with all of their value, but maybe some shortcomings, what's a current hole that PUTT seems to slide into just nicely?
The states and their state organizations need more support, and our national organizations don't really have the resources to fight nationally and individually in the states.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, they usually do have people who are assigned to that, but it's not enough. It's not enough. They're spread too thin. It's oftentimes when we request information that we know that they keep or they have available, it's sometimes it may come to us faster than, average Joe, but it still sometimes is processed to get because they're obviously, spread thin, a couple people handling all 50 states. And we work very closely with the larger organizations, council and such, and we all have great working relationships, with amongst the lawyers and such that happen to represent either state or national levels, and they have been very available to us. There's no complaints there. They're wonderful people. I think that the states just don't have enough support from the state organizations, and most of that is just due to the fact that most of those organizations are not just independent pharmacists. There's academics,
right?
There's hospitals. A lot of the legislative priorities get either divided or ignored altogether, or get diluted by other aspects of the profession. To be fair, so unless you're like truly an independent pharmacy organization in that state, you're likely not getting good legislative push or policy pushed, and you need help that focuses more on independence.
That's really interesting. You have, let's say, a major organization that really cares about independence, and you got a lot of independents joining and focusing and pushing, but that strength may be at a national level, but as soon as then you break out to the 50 states, you've kind of diluted it again. Mm-hmm. So then you say, well, who's sticking up for independence at the state level? Well, let's look to the state organization. The problem is you don't have a real beefy independent pharmacy state organization or a big slice of that pie at the state. That's where you guys come in. That's really cool.
Yeah, and most states don't. Several of them do. I mean, Louisiana has a really strong, obviously, independent pharmacy association, and we end up working with them more than probably anybody else. But we do that because it's such a learning experience with how they do things and how they get things accomplished, and the resources that we can share with them with what they're trying. We want to support them to make sure that they stay viable and successful. But we also want to take back with us and share with other states that may be able to benefit from how they accomplish what they accomplish. So we will a lot of times bridge information amongst the different groups. It's one of those learning without having to reinvent the wheel type things like we talked about before. So I think that when you have an organization that represents all aspects of the profession, unless you've got an executive director like we have at VPHA in Christina Borelli, who has taken the whole independent, plight to heart, like a lot of people do that didn't have any skin in the game until they were introduced to it. We still have to divide some of our attention to the profession and the academic side, but we're lucky because we get to focus primarily. Let's just say if we're going to drop 6 bills, 4 of them will be PBM bills, 2 will be, professional services bills or something like that. But that's not like in every state. They could divide it up as 2, 2, 2, and 2 or something like that. And so those states organizations are representing the whole profession, and so maybe the independent plight, maybe they have an academy of independent pharmacies that meets on Sunday of the weekend of their annual meeting, nothing really strong. So when I say we work in the states, what our board members do, like with what Dawn and Deb and others have done this as well, and that's forming a strong independent group in that state to help represent the interest of independent pharmacy, where the state pharmacist association may not necessarily have as much passion for that side of the profession as we are, or as we have as owners. And that happens a lot. So that's where we kind of, we are finding that we have legislative successes when we're able to not necessarily break away, but organize within that state organization the independents to focus on going out on their own and attempting to facilitate change. And that's where we kind of give them the guidance.
When you say guidance, is that slang for bringing our pitchforks? What is guidance? Is that slang?
Guidance could be anything from encouragement to sharing bills. If we've got a successful bill, like
PUTT will sign its name to a bill?
No, but we can help get it, the draft of it sent from one email to another in another state and change the wording for
Gotcha.
that state. You don't want to write 17 pages of legislation brand new if it's already been written. There's no plagiarism issues there. So, you just, a lot of as states are introducing and passing larger PBM bills, they're functionally conglomerates of different states' PBM bills to put together the best parts that are effective and we like, and we help with that a little bit. NCPA does that too, but like I said, sometimes the resources are a little thin, so we have really good input from people who have been successful, like Greg in Georgia. We work very closely with him. He's no longer in Georgia. He's with APCI, I think it is.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Randall down at LIPA in Louisiana. And these are where they're winning and why they're winning. And, sometimes it's situational. Sometimes the legislators, the legislative makeup politically is just right. That's what kind of happened in Virginia a few years ago. Sometimes it's that they've started the process 5 years ago and are now finally starting to break through, and now we need to guide them on bringing it home. And that is everything from facilitating what we look for in a good lobbyist. It could be how you organize your independent ownership and this model of an independent pharmacy group and how we structured ones in the past. And it could be that we help with billboards or marketing or providing, the papers that we take to our legislators, or if we're in a committee, we often will see our graphics laying on the table of a legislator that's talking about a bill or in a committee. Those came from one of our members that was provided to that legislator.
When you say lobbyists, what do you mean by that? PUTT doesn't have lobbyists per se, right?
No, and we don't lobby, and we don't actually, but we can help screen potential lobbyists that independent group might hire.
You're at a state level, and these are pharmacies that might be being helped by the state association. You come in and add more power, like we just talked about. Where do the lobbyists come in? Are they actually hired by like these, 50 independent pharmacies? And what group is that then? Who signs their paycheck?
However the group structure is organized.
Like we talked about earlier, there's different ways that these are organized.
Yeah. We have an ideal way, but that's not important specific wise. It really is based on the situation and who steps up to help do that. It could be that somebody's passionate about doing it and they find it important, and they just step up and do it. We don't endorse these, and they're not affiliated with us specifically. We kind of let them go out on, do this. This is how we've seen people do it. This is how we've done it in the past. We don't want a bunch of PUTTs around the country. I mean, it was an idea that was tossed around, but we just found that there's too much to guard when it comes to who says they're representing us.
Yeah, right.
So we do encourage states that don't have strong independent representation to form their own business groups, organizations, like, to have their voice and to have their agenda or the things that need to be accomplished front and center for them.
What's an example of a lobbyist? Is that like some young person that's hired and then they're going to email and call and visit offices? How wrong am I on that?
You have to understand that these usually effective lobbyists have their relationship builders either through their previous professions or careers or industry connections. And so, I mean, anybody could, study and be a lobbyist. It's just something that you're more effective if you're, let's just say, the ex-lieutenant governor.
So it's an old fart a lot of times.
A lot of times it's people who are still wandering the halls of their state legislatures, but no longer in the capacity of an actual delegate or representative or legislative or executive.
So it's someone who already has connections. They might do this over a coffee or visiting. What are some examples of maybe of how they would lobby then?
Generally speaking, a lobbyist is going to help to make connections with legislators. They're going to help write bills. They're, traditionally they're in, maybe a lawyer by professional trade. That's handy to have. Doesn't have to be, but it's handy. They make contact to talk about issues with the legislators. They, will set up times to meet. They'll meet with, different players that make decisions in certain things like bills that have been passed and maybe they need, somebody to enforce it. A lot of times they'll facilitate meetings with the people that are responsible for enforcement. They really are just the people who you hire to push your agenda with your legislators.
At a state level, are there any independent groups that have formed and they hire like a full-time person to lobby, or are these lobbyists, they might be a third pharmacy and a third dental and a third something else, or are they usually like full-time for pharmacy at a state level?
Yeah, it just depends on, that can be expensive if you've got a well-funded group.
Right.
You certainly can. Or if you, it's not unheard of for, someone who has made their living and they're just looking for something to either repair or make their soul happy, and may take you on as a charity case, and maybe you don't pay them as much up front until there are some successes. But either way, lobbyists are pretty expensive, and they're either going to be with a firm that represents other groups, and so you have to be real careful because you certainly don't want. And for some reason, they aren't really that worried about it. I think that because by nature they're kind of like mercenaries. They go to battle for whoever pays them the most. Yeah. And so you can have a conflict of interest where, let's just say, you're the lobbying firm, maybe not that particular lobbyist is working for maybe the wholesalers, and there's going to be an issue at some point that your wholesaler and you aren't going to agree upon. Right. And your lobbyist is all of a sudden the person who's, who are they going to represent? I can tell you it'll be the one that pays the most money. So you be careful.
And it might be a part-time thing, right?
Well, it depends on the legislatures too. I mean, California is, year round.
That's true.
Whereas, Texas, for instance, is every other year, and we in Virginia are, 3 months out of the year usually.
But I don't mean part-time through the year. I mean, like, it might be a 15-hour-a-week thing you're paying someone to make some connections.
When you hire a lobbyist, you typically are hiring them based on their formula for doing several things for you. One is to find bill sponsors and drop legislation. There's a specific charge for how many of those you want to do in a session.
Oh, I see.
And then there's a charge for, do you want us to just follow and communicate what's going on with things that you would have a stake in?
Gotcha.
It's cheaper to do that than it is to drop legislation, but When you drop legislation, that number is bigger because you're not only writing and meeting and amending and trying to negotiate bills, but you're also following other things that are going on with that bill,
Yeah.
either in one side or both sides of the assembly. So it's a lot more involved. It becomes probably more than a full-time job for them at that point.
I ain't no genius. And I know states can be sued, but it seems like in pharmacy, you got two things going for you at a state level. One is, and this is where a state could get sued, but it seems like states can more easily write in their rules. If you don't follow, talking to a PBM or less than that, if you don't follow what we're doing as a state, you're not going to get a business license to be a business in this state. That's number one. Number two is the legislators are in these areas. It's like, oh, Scott's former pharmacy was in this area, or I'm a neighbor of so-and-so, or my grandma's in the nursing home by Joe's pharmacy, that kind of thing. It seems to be like in the backyard more of legislators than at a federal level. And for those two reasons, it seems to me like unless there's a huge national law sent down, it seems like states at a pretty cool level to fight the inadequacies that are going on in the industry.
It's definitely easier. We're talking about a bipartisan issue that shouldn't be ignored by either party for the simple fact that everybody can agree that PBMs are a problem, and they're also probably the primary reason why drugs cost what they do. So if you're looking to be fiscally responsible, we're looking to help people out with drug costs, then obviously this is a bipartisan issue. It's an easy like target, Those are the best kind. The feds, there's some fishy crap going on there. I don't know quite what it is, other than the fact that politics is politics, and we're low on the totem pole when it comes to what's right and what's wrong, and obviously so are our senior citizens. You're a second-class citizen at that point when it comes to representation there from, what's hurting you and what's not. But at the state level, you've got what you mentioned. We serve our legislators in our own practices a lot of times. It's not unheard of, though, to be honest with you, for states to lead on legislative issues to begin with, and then nationally it gets the feds pick it up at some point. They're usually slow when it comes to that. The states will address it faster and more efficiently. Even with the political discourse that's there right now, there's still a lot of stuff getting done at the state level. There's not as much gridlock, I guess you would say. The idea that you have better access to your state representatives and you don't have any excuse for not being able to meet, or at least trying to get a meeting with them, because they're all available. In fact, in Virginia, we organize every year a Bring Your Legislator to Work Day. And, Christina facilitates it with VPHA, but we literally get our legislators to come in and walk our pharmacy and listen to us talk about the issues that we're having as small business owners and our patients, how it affects them, so that they can start to be educated. And that's been very, very effective.
I like to bitch a lot about what's being done to us in pharmacy.
Sure, me too.
That's more fun, and you don't have to take the blame. Where are pharmacists currently to blame? In other words, right now, if a pharmacist is not doing A, B, and C, they're to blame. Or are we past that? And it's like, no, we're not going to blame you. You guys are so beaten down. But are pharmacists to blame anywhere right now?
Yeah, but not in the way you would think. We didn't do this to ourselves, okay? However, we have a very poor track record of involvement As a profession, or even as an industry in our profession as independent owners, it's still a very small percentage of us who are actively fighting the fight, either financially or with our sweat equity. It's a very small percentage. Even the organizations that have the best engagement, it's not close to 100%. I mean, Louisiana, for instance, they've probably got the best engagement, and it's set up for them that way because they get things when they join, LEPA. They get audit representation paid for by the organization. They get counsel, when those audits come through. There's a very good value in joining them. There's a benefit for them to do so. It's almost detrimental not to. And you've got to be a very special organization to get to a point where it's obviously detrimental not to join. Like, it hurts you financially directly if you don't. Whereas most organizations aren't, it's detrimental that you don't participate and join, but you're not going to be able to show a direct correlation between those things. So you have to, it's our fault that we've been passive on being involved in pushing legislation and staying active like Louisiana has.
Pharmacies.
Yeah.
Where are organizations to blame? If an organization says we don't have the participation that we would like to have, and you alluded to it, maybe they don't see a direct value, and so unless you can put a price on it right away, or do the potential members, is it up to them to throw financial trust into the organization, hoping that it's going to pay off?
I don't know what motivates people to stay out of the fight. I've heard many, many, many excuses. Anything from what has the organization done for me when I was a member to, they never did anything at all, or they, I didn't benefit from it, and I think that they're missing the boat at that point, because if you're not part of the conversation directing what the organization does, and you sit back and let the organization happen around you, then yeah, there's a good chance that they may do something that you don't agree with. Well, that's because you didn't speak up or you didn't participate. That's your fault.
Someone's listening to this right now, a pharmacy, and let's say an organization came to them and they said, because there is a price. If an organization came and they said, we want $10,000 for you to join, it's like, where do you go with that? Now someone else comes and says, we want $10. All right, well, what does that mean? How do you decide on a value when you're joining something?
Yeah.
Because I know PUTT will take a donation as a membership, and that's pretty cool because someone can put some in, get involved, put some time in.
I mean, we've literally had one-time donations of $10. You're kind of a member, but we ask for, a $50 a month donation commitment because that's kind of where we've calculated we need to be to do what we do. Certainly the roster is as valuable to us as the money. The roster of who we represent number wise is important, just like any organization. Value is an individual's idea, and what I find of value, you may not find of value, but I will say this. We will waste money on some nonsense in a heartbeat that would quickly add up to a membership of 3 or 4 organizations together, where it would be in our better interest to, not buy pizza for everybody 3 times a week versus twice a week. We give a lot of independents, and I was guilty of this too, are known for giving away a lot of stuff, to patients in need or whatnot. I'm not saying take away from them, but maybe there is someone who's taking advantage of you there. You could save a couple bucks there. That's happened to every one of us. And so I think that if you're not doing it because of the financial difficulties, and I get it, I'm well aware of the financial difficulties. Believe me, if you've listened to a single word I've said,
Yeah.
I am aware of it. But I've always found a way to keep my memberships active. Sometimes it was 6 months later, but they didn't really kick me off the roster. But I always have renewed my membership, even if I missed the friggin' renewal date. Somehow I made it eventually. And if you can't, sometimes if you just communicate with the organization, they'll still let you play and take it out slower. Or if you can promise in 6 months that you can pay it, they'll work with you. They don't want to lose you because, like I said, that roster, your name on that roster is pretty valuable too. But if you're not prioritizing it, then your priorities aren't correct. Your priorities should be the viability of your business and what these organizations like ours and the other ones do for the profession as a whole is invaluable. But what does it do for you? Well, indirectly, it saves your business, theoretically. Directly, no, we're not going to, unless you're in Louisiana and you're getting, free audit counseling, or if you're going on our website and going into the member only section where there's resources that no one else has, there's a value to that. But if you're not interested in doing that, then obviously there's no value for you there.
Someone's a struggling independent pharmacy that's fed up with everything. And let's say that you could probably join a couple national groups, your state group, and PUTT. And let's put a figure on that of what, $1,000 total?
Yeah, quick math. Close to it.
Close to 1,000.
Annually.
Worth it?
Oh, I mean, based on what you get for that, yeah, absolutely worth it, because you're helping to fund me and Monique and all the efforts that we put into what we do. I would hope that was the same as other organizations. I know that there's some more bloat in the larger ones. Every dollar that we receive goes directly back into the fight. My board is non-paid. We're all volunteer. Monique has a salary because if we didn't pay her, I wouldn't want her to do this for free. It's too much bullshit. But she probably would, to be honest with you. She'd have to find another job. But you get your heart into this, and it's hard to let go. You can overlook a lot of things in salary if you feel like every day you go home and you're fighting on the good side. But yeah, it depends too on, is it worth it to me? I don't own a pharmacy anymore because I basically got put out of business. But that being said, I also know the efforts that I and my board and Monique put into the fight. I think that's worth it because we do all that on our time, our dime.
Let me ask again from the owner's point of view. So you were in your last business, you owned your pharmacy for 10 years. So let's say $1,000 a year for 10 years. So you're looking at $10,000. And you know how you ended, you sold. If you could say to yourself, that $10,000, and we know it might be not that much, might be more, but let's say an average $10,000. As you look back, would you write that $10,000 check again for the national, state, and PUTT's efforts and so on, whoever else might be in there? Was that $10,000 over the last 10 years a good spend?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got audit legislation revisited and passed back in 2017 that one audit alone could save you that much.
Yeah, right.
These are things that they are no longer able to abuse us audit-wise. They're not allowed to take back for clerical errors, whereas in the past they would nitpick things. And if day supply calculation is a clerical error now that can be revisited if it's incorrect, so they're not allowed to take the money back for that. So yeah, absolutely, one audit alone could pay for that.
I think that's what we have to look at as owners. I think we have to look at a span, because it's hard to look at 1 year and say, was it worth $1,000 this year back in my pocket?
The other problem, though, is, Mike, is that everybody benefits from this. Only a small percentage of us are actually financing it or putting the time in. But everybody benefits. And yeah, I know that there's going to be a degree of people out there who are okay consciously with that. But I don't know that everybody thinks about it that way. But you should be, because imagine what we could do if everybody was in the game. PBMs could never fight us or outfund us if we were all in the game. We have too many players with their ability to influence their immediate surroundings, their local legislators. We have too many boots on the ground at that point. I know you like that phrase that I use. There's too many soldiers to fight. If it was PCMA, they don't have that many soldiers.
Wait a minute here. You're telling me that if 100% of pharmacists, be it owners, employees,
independent owners,
you're telling me if every independent owner joined this $1,000 in these 4 or 5 different organizations, that there'd be a huge difference?
No doubt.
Really?
I'm not going to say it's 100%. I bet if we got to like an 80% or even a 75%, that it would be more effective than PCMA could ever be.
Really?
Yeah.
We'd overtake them.
There's no amount of money at that point that they could outspend us to overcome our influence.
That's interesting.
I just solved the whole problem. If we did that, this whole thing would go away.
We wouldn't have you on here if you weren't going to solve everything.
Got to the bottom of it, didn't we?
You're a three-peat now.
Yeah. Is Ben Jolly still beating me?
By the time this airs, Ben will already have been on 3 times. He's just 2 so far.
Okay, so we're tied.
You guys are tied.
I'm not competitive. When he got the second invite, I sarcastically posted, "Oh, okay, great. Ben gets a second invite." How did he do that? I love Ben to death. We talk a lot, and he's invaluable.
It's those that are fighting in the dirt, but also reaching towards the clouds of change and so on that are the most interesting, because it's a little of both, and that's an interesting spread.
It is, and I'm always fascinated with my peers in these roles, because I can't know everything. I know a lot, but I'm not going to take the time to figure out the things that Ben Jolly does. It's not my personality, I do share a lot of interests that he does, like when it comes to FTC and stuff like that. I mean, the stuff we've been studying and discussing, for years now together. We're just now seeing movement from that standpoint with this administration. But it's interesting that there's so much history that you really should understand from that standpoint when it comes to what has been approved and what has been allowed in industry and corporations, to even understand where to go from here, and it's very, very fascinating. I recommend that anybody who's interested in this is subscribe to Matt Stoller, because the information that Matt puts out is insanely informative.
By the time this comes out, we will have already aired the show coming out with Luke Slindy and Ben talking about the FTC and Amazon and PBMs. All right, Scott, thank you very much. Until next time. Yeah, brother, appreciate it. And maybe I'll find another interesting topic that we can cover next time. Absolutely. All right. Talk to you soon, Scott. Thanks. Thanks, Mike. Bye-bye. Bye.